just want to say thank you for coming out. And I know there's going to be a lot of people catching this after on the recording. Quite a few people have reached out to me to say they will be, so I wanted to say, hey. I'm going to read, I got 15 minutes, so I'm going to read one or two poems from Celebrate Pride, probably a couple more from Daddy, but I'm always about the new hotness, so I'm going to just probably read some new poems that I'm more jazzed about. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tyler, for inviting me. Thank you, Gabby, for hosting. Yeah, let's take it away. So this is my first book, Celebrate Pride with Lockheed Martin, published 2023 with Wolsack Wynn Press out of Hamilton. And I'm going to read a poem called Balloon Fest 86. World record for simultaneous release of balloons. 2 dead. Oh, Cleveland, the spectacle. Concerned meteorologists agree. When a balloon pops, the helium, 300 times its weight in gold, rockets out to space. What hollow value do you assign a death rattle? The suit was settled out of court, in camera. The world is always wanting a widow, a quiet little plot to lay lilies. Remember, drowning Ithacan sailor, that charity faileth not, but kisses the sky like a child's belief. Are these rainbow sprinkles in your vision, or an unfathomable reel of 2 million balloons? Only comfort cold as eerie to be had. Latex masquerading as lily pad. Kiss from a Rose. Did you know that titles can't be copyrighted and are therefore not subject to the intense protections that song lyrics are? Now you do. Kiss from a Rose. I saw my own face in the topology of the rose's corolla. The stem drew blood, and in the drop, the universe passed out through me and into itself. True. We can say that a rose is not a zero-sum game. Under the material conditions of living, its roseness abandons it, yet its rose-dumb remains. The soil grows hurt in the guise of a thorn. Someone once nursed this blue bouquet of bruises, freshly cut. My mother gathered roses with her hair all shorn. I wanted a sign, nothing too obvious or heavy-handed, because those kind of messages from God really tend to freak me out. But still, I needed something which said, authoritatively, that something does remain of the rose after every petal is burned. I'm going to move on to Daddy, which is hopefully going to win Ontario's Trillium Award tomorrow night. Although, you know, I also wish that for my competitors, who are also fabulous poets. They've written some excellent books. Go back to Party City where you belong. There's another epigraph. I've looked this up 300 times and yet it never stays. You were born for this, you little faggot. Some guy named Tony to me in April 2019. Go back to Party City where you belong. The thing is, Tony wasn't wrong. Subwoofer singing through my body, jockstrap under these dancing pants, feeling like imminent civilizational collapse. Last rooftop pool party in Weimar kind of vibe. I guess that makes me a decadent. But I thought before I have to let it go, I'd get to know my body intimately. Guzzle champagne and cum. Learn how to love myself offline. Learn how to love myself while choking up phlegm, crying, my back pressed against a wall, or trawling the internet again for cock 5 hours later. This is healthy. This is individuation. Tony, maybe I was born to meet you. Maybe we were meant to dance all night. The universe brings me my bedfellows. I hunt when the moon's full. I sleep through the light. Edging. On the precipice of a terrible moment in history, I turned towards a screen. I hated the derisory tone of the word screen, as I loved and hated the screens themselves. But like being alive in the present, I had no suitable alternatives. My worth was quantifiable. I reduced myself into syrup, down to essences, net worth, data, biometrics. I texted him, "I'm too depressed to fuck." He said, "Sorry to hear that, but I can't wait to lick your hole again." Smiley face. Dude, read the room. I ghosted. Whatever. Joke's on me. The hole was my entire mind and body. 2 weeks later, he followed me down my street into a convenience store. I thus resolved my fitness goals to become unapproachable, to become qualia, ejecta, corporate responsibility, a commitment to diversity. Histamine seared, a ring in an ear, a broken cascade of lysosomes, a ring of shaggy ink caps. The wisdom hid in mycelia we never learned on the crank of the widened gyre. Daddy didn't love them, so they fell in love with tyrants. Daddy didn't love me, so I fell on my knees for his deputies, lieutenants, his acting subsidiaries. Mother couldn't hold me, though she tried, so I sought her breasts and drugs and candy. And I liked it. I liked it like that. We all did. We were living in a narrative we did not understand. There were ICBMs suspended in the air. There were notifications pending, gleaming in the glass. But there were also autumn leaves glinting gold and rotting in the past. There was a logic to it that I couldn't grasp when I tore it up on the dance floor in my lycra fetish wear, when I stomped my feet, when I shook my ass. The devil reversed. Cast off your chains and be free. Like it's easy. Like it won't cost you a damn thing. Like a damned thing is or is not. Like a damned thing thought. Like thought was the damnable act, and the thinking hell's reprise. Hell's reprise is thought skinned blue in submission and in servitude. About the sublimation of the will, I think I know a thing or two. A quiet pocket to let the obedient child nest into, where they feel safe and secure, warm and embraced. Love is a law, and hell is a place. Hell is a place where we all hold the key. Let love do the thinking. Get down on your knees. I'm gonna do some new ones, and maybe one more for Daddy if we have time. Thanks again for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here with you on the internet. This is a poem called Pigeon Guardian. My skill tree capstone is called Take Wing, Take Heart, and has a cooldown of 15 seconds. When I press the button to activate my skill, every pigeon that I see becomes the foretold dove of peace, bearing covenant of land, signified by the rainbow ribbon every pigeon wears around its neck. Heralds of peace lived all over our cities, politely feeding off our waste, and could be seen if you were willing to open your eyes. Or if you had attained 37 levels in the class called Pigeon Guardian. Menaced at the Juice Bar. Menaced at the Juice Bar by unbearably beautiful beardless youth named Kusha, possessing both the swagger of belonging I associate with heterosexual men and the glint in the eye of someone who is not. He learned into my personal space and asked me more questions about my poems than I'm accustomed to receiving from a stranger in a public place. I squirmed under his gaze, answered him politely, got out of there as quickly as I could. Lightly, I reasoned he was sent there by some god to teach me something valuable, that virility, confidence, and beauty all produce in me an identical response. Get out. This might be my last poem because it takes about 5 minutes. This is called An Experience Inside of Me Called Happy Faggot. It is not anything I am doing, merely a feeling like aspartame, fizzy and silver yellow, moving upwards from below my hip. The feeling occurred due to various causes. Not all of the causes lay under my control. Like when my stepfather washed out my mouth with soap with the crime of singing along to a song on the radio. As that experience arose, it formed the psychosexual condition for a future experience arising inside of me called happy faggot, which came then went when certain conditions were met, while engaged in one certain act or another, when my eyes were met by the eyes of another. Not in the way that my stepfather's eyes, in an arctic shade of blue, turned and met mine flashing in anger, eyes that sang of danger, danger, a feeling I can recognize that arises in another called contempt. That produces a feeling in my body known as filth. That filth creates a separate condition known as good boy. The two experiences do not arise except in conjunction with the other. In logic, we call this a dilemma. And now I am not standing in a crowd. Two experiences called anti-trans protest and queer counter-protest arise and spontaneously organize themselves in front of the 15-foot field that I mistake for the front of my face. Here I am not playing, merely acting in a role that occurs when experiences arise called happy faggots, generating a subsequent experience called contempt in the bodies of people that don't want faggots happy anywhere at all. Some of these bodies use names like love or orthodoxy. Now is an experience arising screaming hoarsely as my 15-foot face field gazes upon perceived bad objects and their children, whom they have conscripted into holding signs that reads, "Hands off our kids," and "Christ, not cocksuckers," the semantic value of which the children phenomena are too young to understand. I know that these phenomena in front of me are not bad objects. Their pain is similar to my pain, identical, in fact. They will have values and experiences quite similar to mine, but also values that are not, such as those called children are the property of parents. And when someone behaves in a way that we perceive as not liking, a corrective must arise. Or the adult is the authority of the child's experience. This is not a value that has arisen in me much since I participated in the activity called therapy. Instead, I experience a feeling called happy faggot, which is the feeling of turning the feeling of having been your father's bad object arising when a child is spanked once or twice or 10 times and told actions have consequences. Those actions had the consequence of producing the activities that ensure the anti-faggot protest will arrive, when faggots engaged with the object called filth on the floors of public washrooms, dance floors, and dark rooms, and on the mixed material air-dried compound we call the fucking street. The street itself made of experience passing known as dinosaurs and seashells under earth and limestone over centuries, just as the activity called bones within the experience I call my body, and also the bodies of my enemies, and all the happy faggot bodies, all these will also cease and no longer arise. All will have gone back into soil which bears our treading, has decayed, and reformed into a paste that bears the weight of whatever walks on it, from whatever civilization arises next on Earth after the activity called human beings has arisen, has died, and is complete. Thank you very much. I think that's all the time I got.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jake. Also, kudos to you. Cheers to you. It's like hard in these things to feel applause. So like, just, you know, in this meantime, here's applause.
Thank you.
Thanks all to.
I kind of black out anyway. You know,
Well,
I'll come to after the performance.
Well, thanks to everybody who's here, present and future, on the recording. Thanks to Writers and Books. I'm glad to be here, glad to be talking to you about these two new books. I mean, I know that you have like a second book and you're already kind of working on other things, but they both feel new because 2023 is poetry new by a mile. I feel like you've got 5 years on a poetry book being new, so we're going to take them all as kind of like a new gesture.
Yeah. Also, publishing 2 books in 2 years was a horrible idea. Don't do it.
Yeah, it happens. I mean, actually, let me just like, so just so everybody knows, basically my job here is I'm going to ask Jake some questions about these books, based almost entirely on my interest and thoughts about them, trying to see what, you know, you have to say about them for about 20 minutes. And then we'll open it up kind of progressively to Q&A. If people don't have immediate questions, I'll keep talking. I don't have struggles with that necessarily. But that's a point at which anybody who is watching at the moment can ask of their own interest. So we'll do that for about 10-ish minutes, and then we'll call it, and we'll all go live our lives. But let's start with the fact that these books came out right around the same time, and I assume were written kind of around the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
More or less.
Do you see an important like stylistic difference between them, or are you just working on some different themes, different questions? Do you see an arc here?
Yeah. So I would say that Celebrate Pride with Lockheed Martin is the first book. There are some, while this was published in 2023, the oldest poems in it go back to 2014. There's quite a lot of poems that I do not care about at all anymore. But I wrote at school for creative writing. But it felt like I would be doing my past self a disservice to not include them. But you know, there's many poems in here that I probably won't read. Actually, Bloomfest 1986 is probably 2015, so it's one of the older poems in the book. But that one holds up. Some of the other ones, I'm a little bit less jazzed. And I think there are some slight stylistic differences. I mean, the first book is a concept album. I listened to The Wall too many times as a teenager. So I guess I've just always been fascinated by the concept of a concept album, and I don't play any instruments or have any talent. So I did this instead. There's a lot more persona and abstraction in Celebrate Pride. I think there is a significant portion of the book that was written in 2019 and then again in 2022. So there's definitely and Daddy I started in late 2018, 2019. So there's definitely some stylistic overlap. But I think on the whole, I'm moving, like Daddy is much simpler in its language. And I think as I've just grown in my craft, I've become less concerned with trying to sound poetic. I mean, I sort of wrote Daddy because I did have this very abstracted style of writing poems until about 2018, 2019. I kind of thought that my own experience wasn't that interesting, or that it wasn't like worth writing about. It wasn't like a subject arty enough for art. And then around 2018, 2019, I realized that actually, if I continued with that, no one would ever connect to my work because they could feel there was like some insincerity there. And also that I was probably going to go insane or die if I didn't like start examining my life, which I really didn't want to do at all. But you know, art calls you and you're not really in charge of the process. So I'd like to think that the poems get simpler, maybe a bit sweeter, and a lot less. Yeah, I think my vocabulary decreases slightly. I'm not sure if that's like a natural progression or just long, when I got COVID, brain kind
Okay,
of stopped working
sure.
as well. So, but yeah, I
But
I
that's
like
a
to think, please.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, that makes sense. The word simple surprises me a little bit insofar as, I don't know, it's less the word that I would use. Concise feels like something, right? Because like, um, Lockheed Martin is a lengthy book, lots of ideas. There's a serious kind of like, it makes sense to me now to hear you say that it was written over a longer period of time, that there's many kind of Jake Byrne eras represented in it. Because I do feel like it's putting a lot together, and Daddy feels much more almost like a project based kind of thing. Like it seems like you had a question or like
Yeah.
a smaller set of questions, and you came at it in kind of maybe a more concentrated way. So simple, simple only I think undersells you a little bit. But I hear.
Okay. I mean, you are right. It was much more focused. Celebrate Pride is like a kitchen sink maximalist kind of book. And then it's got like more stuff on top of that, like the whole separating poems by where they were written
Mhm.
is like a very late addition to the book. That was not part of it until like the second last round of editing. And to be honest, I didn't really like this book. I until the second last round of editing. I'm proud of it now, but I just like it did feel like I'd bitten off more than I could chew or like successfully maybe pull off. Whereas Daddy was just like came in with a very simple idea, which was I'm going to write poems about my relationship with my dad, my biological father. And as I kept going, the scope did expand to include my other parents, my stepfather and my mother. And the second half of the book is kind of a journey of sexual discovery, for lack of a better word, that arose as I was like at the same time that, oh yeah, no, this
Sorry,
is
I have
a,
no idea why that
it's
happened.
okay. This happens all the time. This is an Apple function. It happens all the time during my like FaceTime chats. Yeah, and so there actually was like a third section to Daddy too, which was kind of about experiencing. There's a little bit of it left in the manuscript, like one or two poems about kind of experiencing a spiritual journey and or a mental illness journey that was like very similar to my father's, who has schizoaffective disorder. But I actually ended up like almost completely cutting that out of the manuscript, and maybe that will be a third book one day. But
Mhm.
I really wanted this one to be, especially because the first one is like such a like a shotgun blast. I really wanted Daddy to be much more focused. It's
Sure.
still a long book. It's still like I think it is actually only 15 pages shorter than Celebrate Pride with Lockheed Martin, but it doesn't feel that way because
Sure.
it's just much more concentrated.
So you've brought up a lot of things that I want to ask about. So forgive me for the fact that we're going to come back to several things.
Oh, it's fine.
But I want to start a little bit with this kind of arc that I think you're in or on. And so both of the books have a lot in common. One of the things that they have in common is serious attention to sex writing and thinking about sex. And another one is a serious attention to the many ordinary crises of contemporary living. Specifically, you most specifically mentioned the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, COVID, climate change, etc. So all these things kind of like filter in from the background and come into the foreground in various ways. So sticking with sex for a second, but we'll get back to the other one. I'm curious, do you feel like the way you're writing about sex and the way you're thinking about sex in your poetry is changing? And part of that question is also you're writing about sex now, I mean in part in these new poems that you've been reading here. And I'm curious what questions you feel you're hitting on now.
So really good question.
No.
I think I will be, yeah. I think I will be probably moving away from sex writing in the future. I think my third book might tongue in cheek be called A Book Without Sex.
Good.
But just because like I don't know, there's so a lot of the sex writing in Celebrate Pride with Lockheed Martin is sex that I'm not having and would like to be having. So it's kind of like wish casting or like faking it till you make it. But then I did start having a lot more around the time that Daddy like was conceptualized and worked on. And then it becomes like about writing what you know. You'll note that a lot of the like existential crises are in the first book where I maybe, was not on the right balance of medications, or the whole like, really being focused or tuned in on the various existential crises facing the world is because like I've had an anxiety disorder since I was like 3, which I would now conceptualize maybe as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But at the time I, was just very identified with threats and assessing threats. And I had never really known a life beyond that. And I think you see that kind of fall away in Danny. It's still there, but it's not quite as it's maybe moving back into the foreground, or into the background. I'm losing my train of thought. And then I was having a lot of sex because I didn't have a lot of sex in 2020 and 2021, and I'm sort of making up for lost time. But I actually think I've hit the point of hedonic adaptation. I think I'm like good. I think I'm okay. I think I've had enough. And I think I probably am going to like,
that's good.
Yeah, I think I'm going to write about it less. At the same time, it's just a very fascinating subject, and there's a lot of each new person could be a poem. Oh God, I hate saying that, but I don't know. I think you will. Yeah, I don't know where it's gonna go. I'm really interested in writing about some other subjects. I just need to like kind of develop a competency in them.
Sure. But I think what I find interesting about it is you have an ability to vacillate, right? It's not just, and I'd say just not minimizing, but it's not just an exploration of sex, or it's not just a kind of personal account of your interrelations with various kinds of people and various kinds of points, but it has these like larger political structures mapped onto it at the same time. And I think that vacillation is like, one, appealing as a kind of like writerly perspective. But two, it actually, I mean, it brings up for me another question about kind of the way things are shifting for you now, which is like, you were writing Lockheed Martin at a point in global war that's like slightly different from the way we are now. And it's Pride Month now, and that's a book that thinks about pride with capital and lowercase p's, at times of and in relation to kind of global war. So, in one thing I want to ask you is the way you're reading your own work kind of changing with the political landscape as it kind of moves under all of our feet?
Yes. When I started, like, I think Celebrate Pride with Lockheed Martin got its title. It was just kind of like beamed into my brain one day in like 2017, but it's not published until 2023. So there's time for me to write, about the Ukrainian war. But like in 2017, it was just kind of an idea. It was not uniquely an idea in my head. I mean, Jasbir Kapoor's terrorist assemblages is a huge influence on the work. I mean, there is no book without it. And I'm certainly not the only person who was writing or thinking about war in the 2010s. But there's a line in Home National Anthem, the last poem in Celebrate Pride with Lockheed Martin, which is this kind of like sickening feeling of being like, oh, this was just like a silly idea I had for a book, and now it's out there. And it's like, I didn't put it out there, but I was picking up on something that is now very apparent, very out there for everyone to see, and has just gotten worse since the book was published. And I would say actually, the Russo-Ukrainian war was one thing, but just like everything that I was writing about in 2019 suddenly becomes much, much more relevant when the government of my country and the government of my country's allies are funding a genocide. And it honestly becomes kind of sickening, in fact, to have been thinking about this in maybe an ironized way. I would say Frederick Seidel is a big influence on Celebrate Pride. So there's this heavily ironized persona dealing with this. And then, yeah, that becomes quite bitter to swallow.
I hear that irony. I mean, one kind of a quatrain that stands out to me, because I think it has its own kind of sickening irony to it, is this rhymed quatrain in Lockheed Martin that I'm sorry, my notes don't have the poem.
That's okay. I know the one you're talking about.
Okay, Raytheon market cap soaring, all my wars are foreign, condos all new florin, bombs arc over Golan. Okay, so I mean, you can tell me just about this quatrain because I think it's fascinating and speaks to this kind of sickening feeling in a lot of ways. But we can also take this as a larger question, which is, what are you trying to do with your poetic forms to deal with the themes that you're wrestling with? I think this irony bit sounds important to it.
Yeah, basically, I didn't know how or what to do or how to write about the many, many, many problems facing our human civilization in the early 21st century. And one poet that I found, I mean, there are poets who are writing very well from personal experience of war, of which I have very little, virtually none at all, other than seeing it on television, seeing it represented through these abstract images, seeing it represented through this abstract language. But one poet I found that did was Frederick Seidel. And if you read Frederick Seidel's, especially the books written after 9/11, I really modeled a lot of my, yeah, I don't know why I felt like I wanted to adopt that kind of voice. I don't think I do it as well as Seidel does, and I certainly don't have his access to capital, which lends a kind of authenticity to his gruesomeness. But he's doing interesting things with it. He's playing with it in a very interesting way. And I guess I thought if I just care about doing interesting things, but you're also actually picking up on another kind of refrain that is pretty important in my work. So that is actually the quatrain that you're talking about. Part of the reason that it stands out is it is actually, it takes the meter and like one of the end rhymes from a 2 Chainz verse on a Kanye song. There's way too much Kanye in this book because I wrote a lot of these poems in the 2010s. You know, that's very different now.
Yeah.
I'm not referencing Kanye now, but you know, yeah, so I've basically done an interpolation where I've taken the exact, and I actually do this a lot because pop music is a big influence on my work. Again, I think I'm a poet because I have no musical talent. I would have liked to be a rock star in like another universe, but poetry came easily and practicing piano or another instrument didn't. Yeah, so I do quite frequently, like, especially if I'm at a loss for what to write on, I will just listen to music, listen to pop music and write out lyrics. And then I will like analyze its metrical patterns and sometimes rewrite it. And usually those don't make the cut. Like, and a lot of the citations of pop music do not make the cut because it costs a fortune. So there's quite a bit that's missing that was in the rough draft. That would be more obvious musical references. But I did feel like I could get away with the 2 Chainz verse because it had been essentially completely stripped of its original semantic value. Yeah.
I think it's great. I mean, I just want to say also that pop music isn't the only, and I use this phrase as a compliment, low culture that shows up in these works. I mean, you have, by the way, I'm like the biggest defender of the low culture, but
Yeah,
like Neon Genesis Evangelion, you read a poem with a RuPaul's Drag Race quote. The Butterfly Effect is like a really terrible film that shows up a few times. Super Smash Bros. So there's all these kinds of like, you read a video game poem today. There's all these kind of like low culture things that seem to pattern things, which I think is great. And I really like as an exercise, actually, what you're saying. It sounds to me like some of that material is just literally kind of like inspiring, as in making you make more stuff, which is great.
Yeah, well, I think that for people who are maybe aspiring poets or or actually just anyone who's interested in either poetry or music, like it is a really, really useful exercise to learning meter is hard. Like I do not have the traditional names and definitions, and I don't have those patterns on my head. I had to look them up every time. But like I was I was never a good formalist, but I have some formalist tendencies.
Mhm.
And I think that analyzing pop music, especially in the Max Martin era, post Britney Spears, and continuing today, like a lot of songwriters are using the Swedish formula, which mostly involves having a bunch of nonsense syllables in the bridge because it creates very catchy hooks.
Mhm.
Like I think Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter, like I feel like I did the whole course on that song and why it's catchy. And a lot of it is because of its fucking nonsense. No, that's that me espresso. Like it breaks your brain a little bit. And as a poet, I'm interested in phrases that sound weird and make you like stop and think.
Yeah.
Um, as for the low culture thing, um, my poems used to be all just high culture references and nobody got them. So I kind of, and I guess it's just like everything's grist for the mill. You know,
Mhm.
I think I'm a pretty referential poet in general. Just whatever is coming in my brain is also going out onto the page. So
You
is
note it all. You actually do quite a bit of your homework and actually like referencing like here's where everything comes from. Like you have
yeah
lengthy notes and references at the end of each of these books, which is kind of like though less a literary object than the book itself, kind of a really fun thing to trawl through to see the where your brain is kind of bouncing around.
yeah. I'm glad you liked that because I wasn't sure if anyone would. But you know, because I know that I have to do these notes while I'm writing because I'm always like listening to something or reading something or when I'm composing. Like I'm someone that has like three books open and probably a song on when I'm writing a lot of the time.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of this was just like a defense strategy against like for writing something down, thinking it was mine, and forgetting the actual source and like plagiarizing. So you know, I take very extensive notes. I use a different like I use a special notation for when I'm referencing something so I don't forget it. I've done this for years and years and years. Um, yeah, I mean it's just that's just how my brain works.
Yeah, yeah. I want to transition to talking about Daddy for a bit, and I also just want to give a kind of heads up to people watching that if any of you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat. You can throw them in the Q&A, where I believe I will see all of them. But Tyler can tell me if I'm wrong about that. But yeah, if anybody wants to warm up their questions as I ask you a little bit about Daddy, go for it. So I want to pick up on something you said earlier, which was about this kind of lost part of Daddy, the sort of third section where you were dealing with kind of mystic visions, writing, mental health. And you said it was still in there, and it is in many ways. And one line that
Yeah,
stood out to me is this one that's what is poetry if not psychosis, with a little practice and enjambment and end rhyme. I mean, I'm curious because you're writing a book, very autobiographical book about the relationship between your writing and your sexuality to your father's schizoaffective disorder. And I guess I'm curious with a line like that and thinking about these kind of divine visions, poetry, etc. I'm wondering to what degree do you think of the writing in this book as kind of an attempt to relate to or embody your father's mental health, or is poetry a kind of separate thing? Because you often invite us to think of these together in the book.
that that developed organically. So I spent the first 25 years of my life having a bad relationship with my father, trying to convince other people that he was mentally ill. You know, this he was not super that was not super apparent to everyone. Um, like he kind of just had delusions, but was pretty high functioning until I was in my mid 20s, and then he kind of developed a lot of more classical positive symptoms of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. Although you know he's kind of been weird as long as I've known him. But because I'm a very anxious person with obsessive compulsive disorder or whatever, an obsessive compulsive flavor PTSD, I spent my entire, like my first 25 years thinking that I was going to lose my mind, ended up like my father, and just like being vigilant against that, guarding against it, watching for it. It's why I started going to therapy when I was like 19. I'm still in it today, 16 years later. So there's always more healing to do. But so I was just really, really watchful and fearful of ending up like my father. I mean, this is compounded by the fact that I also chose to do a bunch of recreational drugs, which do not like decrease the risk of that happening. So there was this tension between like my actions and my choices and my fears. Um, but he kind of loomed large over my psyche until my mid 20s, and I continued doing therapy and just started coming into myself a little bit more, being a bit more secure in my identity. But as I started doing that, I started having experiences that are not unlike some of the ones that my father had had. It's a more mystic flavor of it, but you know, it is there nonetheless. And I did not set out to write Daddy about that. The started happening as I was writing Daddy, and it was just like, oh, here it goes. Here we. I've been waiting for this my whole life. Let's go. But I, I don't know if it just skips a generation or something. My great grandmother also had mystic visions. I've got a line or two of hers from her diaries in my book. And she wrote about like she wrote memoirs, and I think she probably had hypergraphia, so she was a compulsive writer as well. And she wrote about her experiences, and but because she was like a Christian and she had very Christian flavored visions, and you know, it was just made sense for her context and her personality, and it fit completely into her worldview. It caused her no distress, and she moved through life, you know, pretty happy and healthy. Um, and that didn't happen for my father. And I guess I wrote these out so that it would happen to me, or that I could process my experiences as I was having them. I also did not expect to become a spiritual or religious person at all, because that was very, very, especially with my experiences with my father, I was really against that shit. I did not want anything to do with it. I didn't want to do anything with alternative medicine or anything woo. And then it came for me. And that is a very humbling experience.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the thing that is not brought up or in the answer you just gave, though, that is such a big component of Daddy, is the relationship between um your relationship to your father and your relationship to sexuality, right? That seems to me like the big question of the book. In
Mhm.
the poem you read today, Edging, you have this line: Daddy didn't love me, so I fell on my knees for his deputies, lieutenants, his acting subsidiaries. Mother couldn't hold me, though she tried, so I sought her breasts and drugs and candy. That seems to me like a psychological explanatory model, right? In fact, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, like to be annoying for a second, it feels like one-on-one Freudianism, right? Like the object of
Exactly.
desire is the lost object that you
Yep.
refine. Is that, I mean, were you interested in this book and trying to kind of get to a kind of psychological explanation for desire? Does that seem right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that so there's plenty of, I mean, it's not all that explicit. I mean, there's some of it, but it's not all that explicit. But a lot of my sexual explorations were with older men. And it was pretty obvious immediately what that had to do with, even though there was no sort of like sexual abuse in my family or anything like that. But there was plenty of other experiences that we could call abusive, or just like not great for child. And that had a very, yeah, it is like Freud 101, you know, and it's I guess I write about it because I found it very humbling, and like to just be like, oh, all of my problems in life kind of boil down to these 4 or 5 really formative experiences that I had when I was very young, and that makes me identical to a lot of the human race. And that is kind of a Catholic in the universal sense, not the church sense.
Sure.
It's a Catholic experience. So yeah.
Mhm. No, that's a good answer. And I mean, it draws me to a few questions about some of the analogies that kind of model of explaining one's desire raises. For example, I guess I want to ask you, you talked a little bit, not just in this book, but then in this new poem, the longer poem you read today, about the role of the good boy.
Mhm.
I guess what is the relationship? I don't know if you can answer this in this form, but what is the relationship between the good boy and the son?
I don't know. I mean, I got some ideas. I got some ideas. I don't know if I'm, really. I'm not writing a PhD thesis on it. These are just
Sure.
some poems that I'm banging out. I would not want to speak authoritatively on the subject. And I certainly also don't think that my queerness is uniquely tied to negative traumatic experiences. It doesn't feel like that on the inside. But there
Mhm.
are flavors that it has acquired that are based on that. And then there are flavors of it that I haven't explored, that I haven't necessarily written about that feel very separate from that entirely. That I might get to in the future. But again, I'm also trying to write less about sex.
Sure.
Yeah, great. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's
I mean, it partly does, but I mean, maybe another way into what I'm interested in getting at is a different character than the kind of good boy that comes up in the poem Two of Rods, which is your words here, policeman daddy, um, who seems to be a kind of, I mean, the image that I get is like the Tom of Finland
yeah,
authoritarian sex father figure thing. And I guess like it seems to me that the good boy wants policeman daddy in some way. Like he wants that kind of like black and white moral logic, that kind of hyper authoritarian masculine figure or something. Um, but so I mean, maybe a different way of asking that question is like, what's the relationship between policeman daddy and daddy?
uh, so there's that poem is a complicated one, and there's a lot going on in there. You are correctly picking up on the black and white thinking aspect. I mean, I think I state that explicitly, but it is very much about kind of my experiences with OCD, of like kind of really categorizing things in very strict binaries, mentally, and also like being aware on some maybe poetic level that that's not a correct conceptualization of the world and trying to move beyond it, but also like needing to unpack in verse why I created those binaries. And yeah, I guess I wrote these books because I was trying to explain to myself why I felt that there was such a big gap in between like my desire and my politics in a lot of ways, because I don't really, identify with like the mask for mask culture, and yet I enjoy it in depth. Um, I'm gonna start blushing now, but there's I guess, yeah, there is some ideas that I'm working out probably on a subconscious level of wanting to be good because I didn't believe myself to be good in the authoritarian parenting style in which I was raised. And that plays itself out in my adult life in a variety of ways. Yeah, again, I don't know if you're
No,
asking.
I think that's a great answer. I mean, in
Yeah,
some
okay.
ways, it almost speaks to like what might be in the middle space between these two books, right? Like, because I do think the question about one's politics versus one's erotics, so to speak, versus the other thing I'll throw in is one's kind of like psychology, which is such a big
Mhm.
for daddy, especially, seems to me to be like what's kind of the friction between these two books, right? Like the thing that they make when you read them together, right?
Yeah,
Which kind of like, I had the nice opportunity to read them together in a quick time before this, and I was like, and that sounds to me like what I see when I kind of see them in each other's view.
yep.
Sense to you? Like, does that seem right?
It does. I think I'm just a poet of friction in general. Like there's friction between my inside world and the outside world. There's friction between the concepts I hold in my head. And I have a line that in a future poem, I don't think it's in this. I think it's part of the third section of Daddy that got cut. But it's just like I don't know how to write a love poem. I tend to like be immersed in love as it's happening. I'm not reflecting on it. Whereas I am constantly reflecting on despair.
Mm.
I've got a line that's something like like an oyster. I require an irritant.
Mm.
So I think like a lot of my poetic process is like trying to find those points of friction or stress and ruminating on them endlessly until a poem comes out.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Well, maybe a good way of closing this out a little bit, unless anybody wants to throw in a Q&A, is actually asking just about the new work, right? And asking about these things that you are putting together. And it seems like you're excited by them. It seems like you have good new work that is like driving you forward. So I'm curious, I mean, is this part of a larger project? Do you have any kind of themes or questions you're really focused on right now? What are you writing with at the moment?
I wish that yeah, I hasn't I hesitate to say that I'm excited about it. I've got material, but honestly, just the experience of publishing 2 books in 2 years was a lot. And I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break from publishing poems, at least in book form. Um, I also, I don't know if you have experienced anything like this, but being a poet or writing poetry and publishing a few books was my dream from when I was a young teenager. And if you have ever attained a dream that you had for a really long time, it leaves kind of a weird vacuum in its wake. So I'm actually am trying to kind of figure out if I want to be a poet. I'm gonna write poems till the day I die, I think, but I don't. I don't know. Like I'm not working on anything right now. I've got a bunch of material, but I had a hard couple years, and the poems were not flowing like they were. And my experience of poetry and working on poems was that it became work, which it hadn't been before. It was kind of a lovely when you publish before you publish a book, it's fun, and then after it's like, oh no, this is my job. So I think you are as likely to see me pivot genres or like art forms entirely. I'm really still figuring that out. Yeah,
Well, I think that's an exciting prospect too. And I want
yeah,
to say that like part of the reason I say that you seem excited by it is I don't know, there's an energy to it. There's an energy to your reading it that I was excited by. So maybe I'm projecting that.
great.
I was
No,
excited.
no, no,
I think you're
you're
on
right.
some good tracks. And I hope I do totally understand what you mean though about the very bizarre thing where you like want to have a book out and then you put a book out and you're like, okay, now what is
Now
happening?
what?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
but I think I hope that also it's an exciting thing for everyone who's reading your work, who knows you, who's watching this, etc., to see what directions you go in. If it's in a different genre, if it's on a different set of questions, who knows? But I've realized after writing a few books that sometimes you have no idea what the thing is until you're like way farther into it than you want to be. So
yeah,
it'll clarify itself as you go. You just got to keep going.
it will. It will.
Well, I want to say thank you to everybody for coming tonight. I want to say thank you to Jake and all of our future viewers, and to Tyler and Writers and Books for having me. I'll let Tyler wish you good night, but thank you again to Jake. And I think this is a
Thank
lot.
you, Gabriel. If you really you gave me some difficult questions, and I could tell that you've really engaged with the work. And it's I love madness, and I've loved anything of yours that I've read, and
I appreciate
it's
it.
been really sweet.
Thank you. I've had a good time.
Good.